So how do you do a pelvic floor squeeze? 30% of women can suffer from pelvic floor issues at some stage of their life. I'm Caroline and I am a physio at the Hogarth. I have a special interest in the pelvic floor and women's health issues. So many women suffer with problems that they don't realise are treatable. So they may have problems with incontinence or prolapse and pain, and they think that it's okay and normal. Interestingly, if you're in France, every single woman in France is offered 6 sessions of physio for their pelvic floor after they've had a baby, not just the first baby, with every baby. In England, you get nothing. The piston is working together, hooking onto the booby and trying to lift it up. It really can make a difference. I'm Caroline and I am a physio at the Hogarth. I've worked here for a couple of years now with Louise, and I have a special interest in the pelvic floor and women's health issues, and I also treat spinal problems and persistent pain. So many women suffer with problems that they don't realise are treatable. So they may have problems with incontinence or prolapse and pain, and they think that it's okay and normal, and they don't actually reach out and talk to people about it and find out that there is treatment available. So one of the roles of a physio is to educate patients so that they understand how they can improve their symptoms, and then teach them exercises that they can do that really help improve their problem. Incontinence is where you feel like you're going to have a leak, or you may actually have a leak. It's often with urine, but you can actually get a bowel incontinence as well. And there are 2 types of incontinence. There's stress incontinence and urge incontinence, which is also known as an overactive bladder. And stress incontinence is normally linked to having a weak pelvic floor, and treatment is focused on strengthening your pelvic floor. And urge incontinence is often an overactive bladder, that sensation of you're trying to get into the house, you're trying to put the key in the door, and you desperately need to get to the loo, and you're in a rush because you feel like you really need to go. And that's often an overactive pelvic floor, so it's tight. And the key thing for that is learning how to relax your pelvic floor. And with both problems, you really end up knowing where all the loos are on Chiswick High Road. You know everything that you're going to do that day is dependent on where toilets are. So it really does affect your life. And it's key to know that you can work on strengthening your pelvic floor or actually learning to relax your pelvic floor. So there are 3 types of prolapse. It's when the bladder can fall into the vaginal wall, or when the bowel can fall into the vaginal wall, or the uterus can fall into the vaginal wall. So you get a lot of pressure on the vaginal wall, which is mainly an elastic, supple tissue that can actually get weaker as we age. And you can get these 3 different areas all collapsing into the vaginal wall, and that gives you the sensation of heaviness because it's bearing down between your legs. Pelvic pain is an area of women's health that is not discussed at all. It can give you symptoms which include painful sex, it can make it difficult to insert a tampon, and actually you can just have pain from wearing certain types of underwear or wearing jeans. It can be really uncomfortable. You go to the GP and you say, I've got discomfort down there, and the GP says, well, you haven't got thrush, you haven't got an infection, no bladder infection. But you know it doesn't feel quite right, but you don't know what to do next. And in fact, those symptoms often get better with physio because it's an overactive, tight pelvic floor, and the whole area needs to learn to relax. You can get a prolapse and incontinence at any stage of life, but it's common postnatally and also when we reach the perimenopause and the menopause. At this stage, our collagen actually deteriorates and it gets weaker because we start losing estrogen, which supports our collagen. And with this, the vaginal wall, which is made of lovely, supple, elastic tissue, actually becomes weaker and more vulnerable. You don't have to see a GP to come and see me. You can just get in touch and make an appointment. And it's a very personal experience coming to see a pelvic floor physio. And I ask a detailed history and find out what you're trying to get from the physio appointment. It's really important that it's a 2-way thing. I'm here to educate you and help you, and you're here to tell me what's worrying you and what symptoms you have. And once I've found out what problems you've been having, I do an internal examination, and that involves a digital examination if you want it. It's not compulsory and it's not necessary, but it gives me a lot of information. So what I'm feeling for is whether you've got a weak pelvic floor or an overactive pelvic floor. So you may have weakness in your muscles, or you may have a lot of tightness and tension in your muscles. I'm also feeling for scar tissue to see whether there's any tension in the actual muscles themselves. And once I've felt what the muscles are like, I'm then feeling for whether you've got a prolapse. And I can tell you what sort of prolapse and how significant the prolapse is. And once I've done that, then we can work out how to move forwards with some treatment. And this is led by you. And it's very important that you feel you can do the exercises that are needed. But it's very important that you do the exercises, because whether it's learning to relax your pelvic floor or strengthen your pelvic floor, you need to do the exercises regularly. Interestingly, if you're in France, every single woman in France is offered 6 sessions of physio for their pelvic floor after they've had a baby, not just the first baby, with every baby. In England, you get nothing. So I would suggest that every patient who has had a child comes to see a physio after they've had their 6-week checkup at the GP. And this would involve finding out how the birth was and working out what symptoms you've got, and then doing an internal examination. And this is very sensitive because it may be quite sore and maybe a little bit overwhelming. But again, a digital examination tells you how strong your pelvic floor is or how weak your pelvic floor is, and really encourages you that there are ways to move forwards and to work out what exercises are most appropriate at every stage. And the other important thing is when you've given birth, your tummy muscles are being really stretched wide, and you can have a gap in your stomach, so there can be what's called erectus diastasis. And this does improve with time, but a lot of people think they mustn't strengthen their tummy muscles and must work very gently, but actually all the evidence, it's a very exciting time at the moment, because a lot of research has been done on how we can strengthen your core really quite significantly by loading it up, get the connective tissue and the collagen to get much stronger by really working your pelvic floor and your core really well to strengthen your abdominals and narrow the gap, but also get rid of the muffin tops that we all desperately want to get rid of after we've had a baby. So the assessment can last for about an hour, and follow-ups tend to be about 30 minutes. Pelvic floor physio is very evidence-based. There is a lot of research to show that you can really improve your symptoms of prolapse and incontinence by doing pelvic floor exercises. So how do you do a pelvic floor squeeze? Now, a lot of people don't know where their pelvic floor is and have never thought to squeeze their pelvic floor. So a good first test, or a trick that you can do to learn how your pelvic floor works, is the stop the flow test. And all you do is halfway through doing a pee, you squeeze your pelvic floor to stop the flow, and you're just trying to squeeze the whole area to stop the flow of urine. And then you learn where your pelvic floor is. Now, you shouldn't do this regularly because you can be at risk of an infection if you don't empty your bladder fully, but just to learn where your pelvic floor is, it's a good trick. Now, the other very useful thing is visualization. So you go, I don't know anything about my pelvic floor, I don't know how it works. Imagine trying to squeeze a blueberry up between your legs. So you're just hooking onto the blueberry and trying to lift it up. So you're squeezing the whole area to get a contraction. The other 2 tricks, stopping yourself from passing wind. You're in a really public place and you can't, and you're just going to try and squeeze and hold it all in there, so that's another sensation you get used to doing for your pelvic floor. And the other one is an imaginary tampon. You're trying to squeeze onto that tampon to get a pelvic floor contraction. So once you've thought about the area and you're getting used to that sensation, how do you actually do a pelvic floor contraction that's going to make a difference? So it's very important that you can do this in any position, lying, sitting, standing, and if you're really good, you can do it when you're moving. But you relax your tummy muscles, you relax your pelvic floor if you can, and you take a deep breath in. So while your tummy's relaxed and your pelvic floor is relaxed, you take a big breath. And then when you've taken that breath in, you start to breathe out and you lift that blueberry up and you hold it for as long as you can while you're breathing out. And then you let go. Now, if you can't feel the letting go, it means you probably let go already. So next time you do it for a shorter time so that you know when you're letting go, because it's very, very important that you get the sensation of letting go. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time if you're not holding it tight the whole time. So how many times do you do it? You do it until you get tired, until you can't hold that contraction. So you may be able to do 2-second holds 3 times, and then you feel, no, I'm a bit tired. Or you may be able to do 10-second holds and you're breathing out for the whole 10 seconds, which is fantastic. And then you can repeat it about 10 times. Now, why do we do breathing? Breathing is so important to get a good pelvic floor contraction. If you think of a car engine and a piston, as you breathe out and in, the piston is working together. So your diaphragm goes up as you breathe out, and your pelvic floor will naturally come up and tighten as you breathe out. And as you breathe in, your pelvic floor relaxes and your breath goes down. So think of the two together. If you get in a muddle, your pelvic floor comes up as you breathe out, and then when you breathe in, your pelvic floor drops down and relaxes. Now, breathing is essential, and if you've got an overactive pelvic floor and you're learning how to relax it, you do a lot of breathing work to try and let your pelvic floor relax. And if you don't know what you're doing and you can't feel a contraction, then you need to see a physio, but that's a good start. If you have been trying to do your pelvic floor exercises and you feel that you're not getting any stronger, you're still having leaks or feel like you're going to leak, and you're struggling to have a good quality of life because sex is painful and it's affecting every aspect of what you do for many reasons, then come and see a physio. It really can make a difference. And it can be just giving you the right level of exercise and working on how to strengthen your pelvic floor or relax your pelvic floor, but it really is treatable. So to start with, a really useful resource for a weak pelvic floor is the Squeezy app. And this just gives you reminders during the day to do the exercises. And it gives you a record of how many times you've done it. So it's a bit like the Fitbit. It really encourages you to do more exercises, and it talks through every time you're doing each exercise so you can get the right squeezes done at the right time. And for the menopause, a really good book is Me and My Menopausal Vagina by Jane Lewis. Highly recommend it, user-friendly, lots of information. And then a very good website is menopausedoctor.co.uk, which is done by Dr. Louise Newson, and she's brilliant on Instagram. Lots of questions are answered. So I highly recommend her as well.